Before we dive into this episode together, I have a few special announcements I would like to share with you all. Firstly, I am very happy to introduce an intimate group counseling experience that will be starting in October and taking place on Saturday mornings into the foreseeable future. This online group, limited to just 5 participants, will offer an affordable and supportive space for rich reflection and genuine connection. If you're interested in joining this collaborative journey of deepening and discovery, please reach out soon, as spots are obviously limited. Also, I'm stoked to announce that I will be hosting a 5-week online Earth Grief group journey beginning in mid-October. This small group will explore themes of earthly grief, love, praise, and resilience through meaningful dialogue, heartfelt reflections, mutual support, and rooted practices of resilience. If you'd like to learn more or reserve a spot, please get in touch. And finally, I will be hosting a 1-day virtual event in late November that will be featuring inspiring speakers, including some who have been a part of this podcast project, and they will all be exploring one theme through their own particular and unique lenses. So stay tuned for more details on this, and if you want, you can sign up for updates through my newsletter on my website's Connect page. Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I'm your host, Te Tayari, and today's guest is Dajé Alōh. In this deeply reflective episode, Dajé invites us to explore the vital connection between creative emergence and one's essence, alongside the essential mythic descent to soul and the heart's role in visionary liberation. We delve into insights on creativity, transformation, and embracing our radical belonging, wildness, and wild wisdom in a world often at odds with real, rooted soul work. As a Memphis-born, Appalachian-cured storyteller, story doula, and ecosomatic depth guide, Dajé Alōh supports seekers, lovers, crafters, and kin in finding and singing the deep song of their lives. She does this in several domains: entrepreneurship, creative rites of passage, and musings on culture work and leadership in these times. She has founded Storywork Studio, the Creative Devotion Series, and Kin Spirit Press, and looks forward to many more projects to come. If you are new to the show, you might like to know that I am a counseling psychologist with an online practice dedicated to supporting wanderers, wanderers, and edgewalkers. If you're curious about how my personalized threshold counseling could benefit you, I invite you to schedule a free insight call. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to connect, explore our alignment, and see if we might walk alongside each other during a pivotal moment in your life. To learn more about my orientation to counsel, including the guiding themes of the threshold counseling that I offer, and to schedule your free insight call, visit coyotecounsel.earth. There is a direct link in the show notes. For more content, including additional podcast episodes and my latest essays, follow that same link. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to subscribe to Wild Heart Revival on your favorite podcast platform. Additionally, your likes, comments, ratings, and shares are not only appreciated, but essential for nurturing the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, let's warmly welcome our soulfully grounded guest, Dajé Alōh, with open hearts and open minds as we take a journey of depth and heart and soul and wildness together. First, I'd like to start off with, I'm curious to know where you are. I'm not sure where you're located.
I am in northern New Mexico. So I'm currently based in between Santa Fe and Taos, New Mexico.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful country there.
Yes.
I drove through it almost a couple years ago now. Very, very beautiful and wild and open and expansive. Have
It's
you been there?
amazing.
Have you been there for quite a while?
This is my 3rd year. So I've been here for 2 full years and moving into my 3rd. And um, people ask how did you get here? Because that's a question that you ask for New Mexican people. Um, or like New Mexican transplants. I feel like many people here like just ended up here.
Mm,
And like most people, I felt like the land just called me here and said yes to me and pulled me in. And
mm,
I even tried to move away, and every night for 3 weeks, almost every night, but definitely in the morning during my daydreams in my visionary space, I kept just seeing and feeling New Mexico. And so I ended up moving back, and
mm,
it just feels like home.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. Very, very interesting and curious to know how, like, how do you describe that gravity, that calling, and how has the land entered you, and how would you describe your relationship over these past couple of years?
I feel like this land has been um, like a mother.
Mm,
There's definitely been there's very loving. There's like a thread of darkness to this land,
mm,
um, that I feel like some part of my soul deeply resonates with, like the permission
mm,
to engage my own darkness and engage like these parts of my psyche that, the shadow. But what I even mean by that is like just the parts of me that are not the agreeable, nice girl that I grew up learning to be.
mm,
And so even when I got here, I felt like she invited me to start to say no to some things and to close some doors and to shut things down and to break rapport. And it
mm,
was deeply challenging for me. And even today, like part of my own contemplation is like realizing how much of my own essence and experience has been like compromised by wanting to be good and like be a good collaborator, be a good partner, be a good neighbor, be good. You know what I mean? And
mm,
New Mexico really teaches you that, you know, like especially the land, she's not really concerned with you being good. She's concerned with you being honest. And so yeah, it's like it was true desert medicine of like just being stripped down of all of my ideas of what it means to be like a good person and to step into my truth. And like even now I'm like wearing this like blue, like this nice approachable blue. I'd already taken off all of my black, you know what I mean? And I was just like, New Mexico just does that to you. She's like, okay, I see what you're doing. I see
mm,
what you're getting at, but
mm,
there's something more honest available. And so,
mm,
yeah, very
mm,
disciplined, like very disciplinary in a lot of ways too with that.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting because I can hear in that exploration, you mentioned good a few times, and it's like good as opposed to bad, right? There's like this binary that exists within that kind of orientation. And it just makes me think of Coyote because Coyote um, emerged out of that landscape in an
Mhm.
evolutionary way and now has spread across like almost all the Americas. Um,
Yeah,
but Coyote is one of the oldest deified, if not the oldest deified creatures that we know of in North America. Um,
right.
Early peoples really saw Coyote as as a creator god. But part of Coyote's essence was that not only were they a creator god, but a trickster, one,
Absolutely.
one that invited the orientation of dissolving binaries, to dance between binaries, to get more
Absolutely.
honest and integral. And
Absolutely.
whenever people step too far into extremes, Coyote would come and fuck that all up on purpose with that trickster energy. And so it's
Yes.
very interesting to hear you also having this kind of interplay with, as you
Mhm.
called it, desert medicine. I just find
Mhm.
that very fascinating. Wonder what kind of reflections you have around that.
Oh, wow. Yes. Well, I think about like another like mythic creature of this land, which is the wolf.
Mm,
And I feel like coyote medicine has really like it's been really confrontational with this part of my psyche that is also like is loba, right? It's like it's
mm,
wolf,
mm,
which I think, when I think about like the interplay of coyote and wolf, I think, even just like I don't really tend to get into like the masculine feminine archetype kind of thing too heavy,
mm,
because I tend to exist very much in the in between. But but I noticed that like a lot of like the men in my life have this like deep encounter with coyote medicine through loba. And a
mm,
lot of women have a deep encounter with loba medicine through coyote. Like
mm,
just like this experience of like, I thought this was going to be something and it's not. um,
mm,
or like men have like a lot of the men in my life, especially here in New Mexico, have this encounter with loba where they're like, oh, look at this beautiful sweet puppy of a woman, and then she has teeth and like,
mm,
and she has anger and she has like rage, and it hasn't been initiated, and it's like there's this whole experience. And I feel like that's the experience that I've been having with like I feel like what I thought this was going to be here in New Mexico, it was not. Like
mm.
so many of my illusions were just shattered. Um, and it initiated me more into, what Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, like the Jungian analyst, depth psychologist, she wrote the book Women Who Run with Wolves. She talks
Yeah.
about um, how the woman's psyche is formed in the wilds of the desert when everything is stripped away from her.
Mm,
And that is a little bit of like what I feel like my experience here has been like. It's like all of my ideas of what it should be like were just stripped down completely.
mm,
And what I was left with was an invitation um, to mature, or to like go into what Dr. Klissa calls like a kind of psychosis that is content with staying demure and small and fragile,
mm,
and kind of obsessed with that fragility, and obsessed with the aesthetics of fragility and smallness and softness,
mm,
instead of stepping into the matured woman's psyche that is more like more wolf, smiles less, has is very concerned with her tribe, and listens to the land and turns on her ears to what the body of the earth is speaking first, before she is becoming enmeshed with what everyone else is thinking and doing and wanting from her.
mm,
And
mm,
it's very clear about her, like her body's like direction, where she's going. She feeds herself, right? She takes care of her needs.
mm,
And that was the initiation. I feel like that was like the cracking open. It like really brought me to all of my edges multiple times. um
mm,
and without elders, without people, specific characters in my life, I don't think I would have survived that. I think
mm,
it would have like crumbled into that like sort of um overdiagnosed, like small fragile version of myself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I want to think good.
Wow, a lot of important threads in what you just shared. Thank you for that. I can recognize it's cool to hear this reflection and exploration that you've been in, and your welcoming in of desert medicine and the wolf and the coyote, and I can recognize it in your writing and the things that you're exploring in your writing medium, and I'm sure in the other work that you're doing. So that's really cool. So I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into what I was
Yeah.
able to find and what felt really curious and interesting to me through your writing and your work. So considering the impact of an overculture that still largely operates under Enlightenment and colonial ideologies, promoting the idea that you can be anything you want, you have the right and even the duty to take control and extend dominion over the living world, how do you foster visionary development that resists and or composts these ingrained narratives? How do you support others in reclaiming a more authentic, mycelial, and soulful orientation toward deepening their creative capacities and co-creating regenerative, inclusive, and heartfelt approaches to visionary emergence?
Absolutely. I love this question. Well, I think about Carol Sanford, who is this elder who a lot of, you think about permaculture, you think about the Regenerative Institute, all of these institutes see her as like their kind of elder. Like she has spoken into these places
Mm,
and to the people who have birthed these institutions and encouraged them to bring them into life. And she imagined seven principles of regeneration,
mm,
based on her Mohawk grandfather's teachings,
mm,
and one of those principles is essence. And before I discovered Carol Sanford, I've always been drawn to the concept of essence, but like she just really dialed it in a business context, because you talk about essence and it sounds really woo-woo and it sounds like da 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 da.
mm.
There's all kinds of associations with the idea of honoring your essence and da 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 da. It sounds
Right,
like someone who has a lot of time and money and doesn't need a job, right?
right.
But Carol really dials this in. She says, like, this is fundamental, right? And even in like kind of animist philosophy and ways of being and thinking, there is this way that you have to almost like surrender your idea of what this plant or this land can do for you, and to tune in and listen into the essence
Mm,
of what the land and the place or the flower or that vine is here to do. And that essence is deeply informed by the context. It's in conversation with the context. But sometimes the essence of that thing can't be controlled by the context. So we see kudzu and ivy doing their thing all over. They're just expressing their essence all over the place, right?
mm,
Regardless of, what is here, what's in the way. And so when I think about the creative process, when I think about vision, when I think about visionary process and visionary development, I'm constantly thinking about essence. I'm constantly thinking about what is this particular person in this particular place, in this particular time, what are they here to express?
mm,
What is their sort of like thing that they're here to do that isn't like a purpose? It's not purpose. It's not deciding what is my purpose, what is my path. It's the natural innate expression of that human being. And when you think about it from a regenerative perspective, which invites us to think about it from a developmental perspective, which is that things start as seeds, people start as embryos, and they grow and have potential to become, there's all this potential available. There are limitless possibilities within the context of that person's essence,
Mm.
right? So a daisy can't become a rose, right? And a rose can't become poison ivy. There is a developmental arc available within each person. We access that developmental arc through visionary process. So whether that visionary process is happening through the imagination, or it's happening through a medicine ceremony, or it's happening, in the dream state reality, we are all accessing the developmental arc of our essence through vision, and we choose whether we want to engage that vision or not,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And so there's I feel like we are wired for what I call our culture work, right? And I like that word a little better than purpose, because I feel the angst and the hunger when people are like constantly searching for their purpose and they never find it.
Yeah.
Or the same thing with alignment. Like, people are constantly searching for alignment, and then they
Mm.
go through these massive deaths and discouragements and disappointments when they thought the thing that they were aligned to was going to be the alignment forever, but the alignment fades, which
Yeah.
alignment is supposed to fade because we are fluid. Alignment is momentary, purpose is situational, right? But essence is forever.
Mm.
Essence is what goes on to live beyond you, beyond the grave. Your essence will be felt when your descendants touch into your spirit from, the physical realm long after you're dead. That is what's felt by your descendants. It's your essence.
Mm.
And I feel that visionary development, visionary process is how we care for culture through the liberation and the care of our essence, the acknowledgement of essence, the permission to allow essence to inform culture, inform environment, inform classrooms, inform our learning process. And
Mm.
so yeah, those are some initial thoughts that I have about that. Like, if we as a culture turn toward honoring the individuated person and their essence, we would have a completely different cultural landscape. We would have different structures, different ways of expressing ideas that
Mm.
come to us, right?
Mm.
Different constructs, different structures, all of it.
Mm. Yeah. Wow. Well said. Yeah, this notion that, like, once I find my purpose, then I can stake a claim in the ground, and I've
Mhm,
made it to that place where I can then become what I'm here to become. Or that sense that alignment, yeah, like once you hit the groove of alignment, then that's the groove. Then you're
mhm,
aligned, and then there's no
mhm,
more need to expand beyond that. It's
mhm.
really this self-limiting or
Absolutely.
this imposing way of what it means to be alive, awake,
Mhm,
tuned with deeper flows and forces that are
mhm,
dynamic and in process, and it's
mhm,
becoming always.
mhm.
Um, how does how does the heart fit into this? And the heart, because
Yeah.
you said I think you mentioned felt sense, or you said something like felt sense, and I immediately felt my heart, come alive in that moment of like, hey,
Mhm.
how does the heart play a role in what you're exploring here?
Yeah, well, I wanna say first, there's a role for purpose, there's a role for alignment, but
Mm.
if we need them to be the things that define the entire arc of our developmental process, we will just be disappointed every time. And I
Yes.
think this is a really great place to talk about where the heart is, because the heart, I feel like the heart is this very responsive organ in the body. It's always responding to the environment. It's
Mm.
always responding to the context. Nothing is ever static. We are all in relationship to each other's choice points, right?
Mm.
Nothing, no future is ever certain. We're all in response to the shifting of timelines in other people's lives. We're all in relationship to that. So the heart gets to be this incredible, like, place of I almost want to say, like, filtration. It's
Mhm.
like where we kind of keep the pulse of our essence alive. I feel like there's also this part of me that's like, I don't even know enough about the heart to be able to
Right.
do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's so vast, it's
Yeah.
so expansive, but the level of field that the heart can create, right? The level of influence that the heart can create in a room, the state of someone's heart
Yeah.
can shift an entire cultural tide
Yeah. Yeah.
in one direction.
And it's non-rational, it's
Yes.
non-logical, so it is difficult to like speak linearly about it, you know? We need to get
Hmm.
into like, the non-linear poetry of what it means to
Absolutely.
feel and generate meaning and story to be able to even begin to sense what the heart's capacities are. And even then, it
Absolutely.
goes so much deeper than we'll ever be able to encapsulate in any way, I
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's like, one of the things that I honestly like that keeps me like really grounded is that, I might think that my ambition is what fuels vision. I
think.
might think it might be this like articulation of yang energy moving through my being
Mm,
and putting
right.
things into, whatever. But if I'm really honest, it's my grief.
There you go.
It's grief. And when I am disconnected from my grief,
Yeah.
the things I create absolutely collapse. Like they just do not last. When I'm disconnected from my heart,
Yeah.
my like even my joy, but more so my grief, like what breaks my heart open.
Mm, mhm,
That to me is like my compass for, oh, okay, this is how I want,
mhm,
to take shape in this season. This is
mhm.
how, this is what moving toward that particular direction feels like. It feels like my grief, and I want to use that word with like real sensitivity and intention. Like I don't mean, the state of like hopelessness and collapse, right? I
No,
don't
I
mean,
sense your reverence. I sense your
yeah,
reverence. Yeah,
it's like what is breaking my heart, and even like the stuff I don't have language for,
yeah,
right? Like especially that stuff that I can't quite put a finger on.
yeah,
But when I touch into it, I feel in my heart comes alive,
yeah.
and I can feel like my emotions come online, and I can feel like other parts of my being and my body start to like interact with that pulse.
Mm, mm,
And it's just information. It's
mm,
information.
mhm. Yeah, I'm coming to really believe that grief is the fertile ground from which love can bloom,
Mhm.
and that love is where our most regenerative and authentic inspiration is drawn from. So, like, I don't think that we can really become who we're here to become as so-called individuals and communities and landscapes without really rooting into the realness that is the grief of life and death and
Absolutely.
change and loss. And I had this image when you first brought up grief there. I had this amazing image in my mind of, like, have you spent time in the Pacific Northwest in some old growth areas?
Just a
A
little bit of
a little
time.
bit? Okay,
Yeah. You're back.
okay. There we go. I can edit that out.
Awesome.
Well, I was saying I had the image of a nurse log. Do you know this term and what that is? Nurse
Mm,
log. And
no.
okay, it's amazing. So especially when you go into these old growth forests, you're walking along and you see the remnants of what used to be a big
Yes.
living tree that's now on
Yes.
the ground, covered in moss and all sorts of things. But also coming out of that log is new growth, new trees,
Mm,
different species even, you know? And that's what I feel, that's what I imagine when we're able to really root into the regenerative capacities of grief, that we
Absolutely.
touch into this pattern, this essence of the nurse log, that in the death and the decay, in the compost, that that is the vitality of life, love, and lore.
Mm, I
Mm,
love that. That is the vitality of life, love, and lore. The
mm,
nurse log. Yeah,
mm.
I just think about like I had this sense of like the nurse log as this like kind of like massive, wet, crumbling like structure that is just melting into the earth
Yes,
and just
yes.
becoming soil like right before your eyes.
Yes. The most amazing is when they fall over a creek or a river or something, and they
Mm,
still have they're still intact and they have their structure, but then there's trees growing out of them above
wow.
the river. Like, it's
Mm,
just incredible. Anyway, so that has me thinking too about something else I wanted to discuss with you, and that's the power of belonging. It seems to me that orienting toward the co-creative project of belonging is one
mm,
of the most important ways to open and deepen our imaginations and capacities for new ways of living, being, and becoming. So, how do you believe we can make belonging so infectious, for lack of a better word, that it fundamentally transforms our relationships to ourselves, each other, and the living world?
mm. Well, I continue to come back to essence
Mm,
with this. And I feel that one of the primary ways that we can nurture belonging is to honor our own essence. That
mm,
essence has to be rooted into something and it's rooted into the earth, right? And
mm,
the earth, the soul of the earth, like I think about, like those nurse logs with these like little trees popping. We are kind of like that with the
mm.
anima mundi. We're kind of like that with the soul of the earth. We are offshoots of her soul. We are parts of the wholeness of her essence.
Yeah.
And part of our forgetting is that I think part of the sickness, the separation, is that we forget that. We forget that we already radically inherently belong. And it's not about how hard we believe in it. It's just a fact.
Mm,
It's a fact.
mm,
And there's no politic to it. There's no county line around it.
mm,
Truly, there really isn't. And this kind of gets into some edgy territory for a lot of people. And there's absolutely like a political conversation that should be had inside of this context, nuanced conversations. But at the base level, in essence, our radical inherent belonging to the mother is irrefutable. It's
mm,
non-negotiable.
mm, mm,
It's clear and it's true. And from that place, when I know that I belong, a lot more becomes available when I witness another person. Because then I know, oh, they belong. They radically inherently belong to the
mm,
soul of the earth. Even when I am pissed off, even when I don't really want to be in community with them anymore, to be honest,
yeah.
right? Even when I want to create separation, there's no way that we can disturb our belonging to the earth.
Mm,
And I think it's from I personally believe it's like, because I don't have all the answers on community dynamics and fostering belonging in community. um this is a place where I'm deeply listening because it's something I long for, but I'm also, you know really very willing to acknowledge my own limitations when it comes to, you know, yeah, just certain things like repair.
mm,
I think
mm,
this is something that I was sitting with and pondering for the last couple of years. And yeah, like what does it look like to, um, something I was writing about this morning, like fully honor the essence of who another person is and not need to change them to make ourselves feel more comfortable. I think these are the places where belonging begins. It begins in our own like internal control paradigm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even with like trying to control, like trying to make everybody belong, and that's a level of control.
Mhm.
You know, like trying to control the story of how people expand and contract, ebb and flow in relationship with each other and ourselves, right? And I feel like maybe this is a place where belonging can begin, and even just like the ways that we like envision that, the ways that we engage that as like a visionary arc, as a developmental process. That can't be fixed in therapy. You know what I mean? Like it has to be engaged with complexity. Whew, there's so many like nooks and crannies of that conversation though. And
Absolutely. And I think there always will be. I don't think that there's, hopefully over time it becomes more clear and obvious and refined even as to what it means to belong to ourselves and each other and the living world. But because it's all living and dynamic, it's like everything else we're talking about. It's this continual, like you said, listening. I'm deeply listening for this. Like I think that that's a pillar. I heard it said once that listening is worship. And it's like,
yes.
like
Yeah.
what are we turning toward as worship? And when we open ourselves, and I love Bayo Komalafe talks about like a politics of tenderness. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm reminded of that right now. Like, what does it mean to willingly, consciously, sensitively tenderize ourselves? What does it mean to become more porous while still holding strength and structure?
Yeah.
To open ourselves to be touched by the living touch of the world and another, and to allow them to be who they are in their essence, while also belonging to ourselves enough to have
Absolutely.
to be porous, but also to hold boundaries, to you
To have
know
a skin.
yeah, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sensitizing the skin enough to allow the world in, but then to still
Absolutely.
remain um, remain coherent as to what it means to belong to ourselves within that. It's incredibly
Mm-hmm.
wild, entangled, enmeshed, and confusing oftentimes process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm. Something that I saw you write about recently. You said that there's a direct relationship between the descent to soul and vision. And when we don't acknowledge this relationship, it leads us to a culture of visionary crisis. So, how do you support yourself and others, community, in recognizing and navigating this necessary descent, as you call it? And what role
Mhm.
does this process play in addressing the visionary crisis you describe?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I first want to start by maybe providing a little bit of context for descent, what the descent to soul is, and where I get that from. And so there are a couple places that I want to touch into, and maybe some resources to offer people if they want to look further into this. So, um, there's an eco-psychology reference to the term through Bill Plotkin's work, School of Lost Borders, Innis Valley Institute, um, and like Bill Plotkin speaks very specifically about the descent to soul as this process of initiation that the psyche moves through in order to mature. Right? And so as much as we'd like for the descent to soul to be this experience, it's like, I just had a very bad day, right? I'm having a hard time at work. It tends to be a lot more aggressive than that, where the psyche is having an experience where it is going into cocoon mode, kind of like a caterpillar. So it's literally changing shape, changing form, morphing into this cocoon. And then there's this cracking open of the cocoon. And the consciousness of that being, that caterpillar, as it goes into the cocoon and it becomes cracked open, is not, oh, I'm going to become a beautiful butterfly. It's, I don't know what the fuck is happening. I'm dying, right? So just to contextualize, like a descent to soul is not necessarily like, oh, I'm feeling a little anxious. I'm going to go to therapy for a couple sessions and like clean this up, right? Like the descent would be, you know, what would happen if you got really up close to what is at the root of that anxiety? What is at the root of that depression? And you said hello to it. And then you started to see within your subconscious these like sort of subconscious templates is what one of my teachers calls them, or like these little imprints from your childhood of this memory and that memory, or this ancestor and grandpa, you know, and this memory and all of that, that begin to create a construct, a schema for how you live your life and what you believe is possible. You know, sometimes traveling with that feeling, that experience that you're having, rather than pathologizing it first, also finding the right kinds of psychotherapists and support systems who can travel with you there and not just prescribe you a medication. Like, you know, not everybody who's a therapist is going to be able to go with you into the depth, right?
No,
So it's really important to know that, right?
absolutely.
And
Don't
so
settle. Don't settle.
do not settle.
No,
No,
because it's
don't do it.
dangerous. Like
It's
you're saying,
dangerous.
like I don't want to cut you off too much, but it's violent.
Yes,
It's
yes,
violent. Like
absolutely.
like we have this cute image of a caterpillar going into the cocoon to become a butterfly. It's
Yeah.
violent.
It's so
They
violent.
literally dissolve. They
Yeah,
dissolve to become anew. And you think that
absolutely.
becoming feels good? No,
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
no. You're being ripped apart so that you
Mhm.
can reconstruct something beautiful. And then you're birthed and you crack through, like you said. I love that image. And then you're out in the wildness of the world,
And that's
making,
also
yeah,
violent.
making a living, learning how to make things happen again in a whole new
Dear
context,
God.
in a new way.
Yeah.
So luckily, the caterpillar has this depth of connection to its pattern that it's able to do that seemingly on its own, even though it's intimately tied to the flowers and the currents and all, you know, all sorts of things. But for the person to enter cocoon, like I have this client actually that's very new, and she came to me because she has been put on medication from a very young age, and for ADD, so-called ADD,
Mhm.
at 6 years old, and then becoming an adult. Of course, things start to arise. All the stuff that was pushed under the carpet uh, comes up to the surface, and then she got put on more medication, this time SSRIs and barbiturates. And for a decade now or whatever, she's been just heavily medicated in this way because the overculture paradigm, the biomedical paradigm is, oh,
Yes.
you're a machine. We just put the right inputs in and then you'll be okay. And you don't have to turn toward the pain and the feelings. You can turn away from it and let these chemicals and medications deal with it in the background. But of
God.
course, she's recognizing that that's not that's not how you're here to become, right? And so
This is
she's
why
in
we
this
need elders.
deep inquiry process of,
Mm-mm.
whoa, how do I meet this? And
Mm-mm.
something she said that was really striking to me in one of our sessions was, I'm scared that I'll just dissolve. I'm scared that I'll just dissolve. And I said, that might be exactly what needs to happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. What a celebration. Like, what I think about belonging is like, what would happen in culture if we celebrated that process?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
there was ceremony around that process rather
Wow.
than ceremony just because you graduated from high school. Do ceremony, do whatever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like I just feel like the true maturation happens in the dissolution
Yeah.
of identity.
That's right. And what's
Yes.
wild, one more thing with this example is she goes to her family and her friends and her psychiatrist, and they're all saying the same thing. Up your dose, change your medication. Don't literally people telling her, don't focus on the emotions, don't think about it. Just go find a job, do these things, up your dose. And finally she comes to someone, bless her heart, she came to someone like me where I don't think like that at all. And
Absolutely.
I love that you brought up celebration, because she met me and I looked her in the eyes, I said, this is beautiful.
Yes.
Your dissolution is beautiful. You're coming
Absolutely.
apart right now, and that's
Yes.
exactly what you need. And what happens? The next morning she wakes up and some of her major symptoms that she's been struggling with every morning for a long time disappears. Just from
Absolutely. I'm
someone
completely
celebrating her
unsurprised.
process. Yeah.
That was the integration. So we
Yeah.
talk about belonging. That part of her had been fragmented from her being
That's
for
right.
so long and taught there's something wrong with you. We need to separate this part from you. We need to reduce it down to all of its symptoms, and we need to medicate it so that you can be a contributing member of society.
Yeah.
And that's how we're taught that we don't belong.
Yeah.
That's how we're taught that we fundamentally don't belong. But when that part of a person is welcomed in and
Mm,
said, oh, this is beautiful, this is good, this is natural, this
mm,
is this is part of you, let's celebrate that.
mm,
It does not surprise me that her symptoms just begin to fade and disappear.
yeah.
The
Yeah.
symptoms of her fragmentation, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And and this is what the descent to soul is here to really help us meet. It's here to help us meet the symptoms of our fragmentation, even in the creative process, especially in the creative process, because we spend most of our time, at jobs, at work, trying to figure out money and taxes in creative process. There are
Mm,
no I have yet to find, any places in culture where the specific visionary creative process is met in this way.
mm. Yeah, I think dissent is an essential word in this. I'm
Mhm,
reminded of the quote from Carl Jung where he says, people don't find God because they don't look low enough.
mhm,
And of course, the highest reaching beings in our
mhm.
world are trees. And where do their
Absolutely.
roots go? They go into
Deep,
the deep, dark thick of it.
deep, deep, deep,
What's
deep.
that Rilke poem? My
Mhm.
God is dark like 1,000 roots that drink in silence.
Ooh, yes. I love
So
that.
we have all these people in the realms that I think you and I walk through, that we walk on
Mhm.
the edges of, at least, where people are all about ascent and
Oh,
ascension and
absolutely,
ascending.
yes.
But what you're saying and what we're exploring right now is actually
Mhm.
there is no ascension without descent. And in
Absolutely.
fact, you need your roots before you can reach.
Absolutely. This is where the visionary crisis comes in, right? So it's Icarus. It's an Icarus story where
Mm.
we're all trying to ascend and we're taught ascend, ascend, raise your vibration higher, 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 higher.
Can you
And
explain
and
Icarus for people who don't know what that story is?
yeah, so Icarus is the story of it's a father-son story. And you know, I'm probably going to butcher some of it. So for all of my
It's okay.
classical myth
Just the
people,
kind of essence of it.
don't come for me.
Yeah.
So this man was like, I'm gonna build you wings and you're gonna fly high, 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 all the way up to the sun, right? And so he builds his son wings and Icarus flies higher, higher. And then his father starts to get worried. He's like, oh, you're getting a little too close to the sun. But Icarus is like, no, I think I can make it. I can make it all the way to the sun. And his wings start to melt off.
Oh,
And he falls and tumbles all
yeah.
the way to the earth and he dies.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, I take that as you need to be, again, rooted and grounded in what your visionary, what it means to bring your visions to life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
sure, reach for your visions and your dreams, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to do so from a grounded, rooted place. Otherwise, you're going to
Absolutely.
burn up. And we literally call it burnout, right?
It's
That,
burnout. Yeah. Well, this brings me to the other part of Descent to Soul. So there's like the eco depth psychology version of the Descent to Soul. Bill Plotkin's work, highly recommend him. And if you do delve into his work, I'd recommend starting with Journey of Soul Initiation.
Mhm.
Beautiful book. But then there's also the other side of it, which I think needs more light and more like conversation, because we have a lot of conversations about quote unquote the goddess, but we don't talk about who the goddess is. We have this depiction of the goddess. It's like, women in the river with the flowy linens and like, you're such a goddess. You know what I mean? It's like a whole thing.
Yeah.
of like the like light being and
Yeah.
stars and freckles on your face, and there's a whole aesthetic.
Yeah.
But the goddess is like, the original OG goddess, the oldest stories of the goddess are ones where the goddess is like born from a bog. Like there's one in particular that I'm studying, Athena. Her original myth is that she was born in a lake, or like the oldest written goddess myth, Inanna,
Mm.
Sumerian goddess. And her story is that she descended into hell to go and see her sister, right? And as she goes into hell, she's required by the ways of the underworld to strip every adornment that she had put on, all her armor, her sword, everything stripped. She meets her sister, bloody, dirty, naked. Her sister takes her, nails her to the wall on a meat hook, leaves her there for 3 days, right? And her handmaiden basically goes and tries to rescue her, sends down emissaries from this underworld sea god who's like, I'm going to help you because the sky gods did nothing. They didn't care. Her
Mm.
husband usurped her throne. And so as Anana is resuscitated back to life by these emissaries, to make a long story short, she ascends up from hell with demons following behind her. She has a mission, right? And I love, Carly Mountain, who is a depth psychologist who was bringing forward this story of Anana, saying there's an ascension process.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And this is what I mean by, the descent and the descent and the visionary process are together. Like they are a pair. We don't descend. We descend, but we don't ascend from that place. We don't come out of the descent process without vision. The
Mm.
descent turns on the inner gaze. It turns on our seeing.
Right.
This is the function of descent. It's not just
Yes.
so that we can go and feel our feelings. It's you're turning on
Yeah.
your capacity to see in the dark. When you can see through the dark, you have vision. That vision propels you upward from the pits of descent, the gates of hell, into the upper world. And there is this like, it's more than ambition,
Mm.
right? It's the inward fire, or as they call it in like Taoism, your Jing like
Mm.
comes online. It turns on at your or kundalini, like if you're in another tradition, like whatever tradition, your life force, whatever it
Mm.
is propelling you out of hell into ascension. That life force has to create something. It has to be poured into something. It is
Mm.
not for it's not for feeding who your ego was before the descent, this is an opportunity, and this is kind of like an edgier theme, but this is an opportunity for your ego construct to crack open and mature and become a part of you, an aspect of you that has the balls and the gumption to actually create something.
Mm-hmm.
So what the ascension process is for is not to perpetuate a small self ego story, but it's to actually mature and humble the ego so that it becomes a function of your psyche that can actually put things into form and bring your world into right relationship, into the humility, which means an of the earthness. So your essence can emerge from that. Right? There's this whole beautiful process. And so goddess mythology is actually about that if you look closely enough. Like there's literally no goddess myth that I have encountered that ends with, and the goddess reigns free in her light forever and ever, and she never faces her shit ever. You know,
Yeah.
I've never seen a goddess myth about that. They're always descending into some kind of hell and coming out with some kind of vision on
Yeah.
fire for the
Right.
earth.
Yeah. And then putting in the arduous and continually
Labor.
shaping labor that it takes to bring that vision to life.
Birth.
Yeah, I loved when you're describing that image of the linens and the water and the labyrinth. I
We
thought,
all
well,
know.
first off, I saw like 1,000 depictions of that, but then I thought, if you can't see the goddess in the pride of lions eating a wildebeest ass first while it's alive, then you
Absolutely.
can't see the goddess.
Oh,
Again,
absolutely.
the violence, the muck, the dirtiness. It makes me think too, I learned recently that some of the ancient desert languages in the what we now call like the Middle East area, that the word compassion, that the idea compassion and what we know that word as, that idea as today, was connected to the same idea of the womb, which is interesting because the womb, of course, is where life is made, and it's that portal of life and death. And also, it's the entry into life, which is, although it's like the most beautiful thing ever, it's also violent. There's
Yes.
blood. It's carnal. There's carnage, you know.
So
There's
carnal.
pain. There's screaming, and so compassion, to be with the womb, of course, to be with the suffering, to be with the violence of life, and that's where love can be seated also. And
Yes.
that's what, so it's like grief, compassion, love, they're all entangled and intertwined. And
Yes.
that is also what gives life to the roots of the descent, which gives life to the reaching and the branching of vision and the blooming and the fruiting of that vision
Yes.
eventually come to fruition.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think about this at the hormonal level, right? Like recently I've been diving into this hormone called vasopressin.
Oh,
Um, are you familiar?
yeah, I've heard it thrown around. Yeah. It has to do with
Yeah,
the birthing process too, right?
in some ways,
At
yeah.
some point? Yeah.
So this idea of love, like there's this idea that love is just, that you're feeling warm and safe
Mm,
and held. And that
mm,
word safety is thrown around a lot. Like it's like, okay, I think we're actually over indexing on safety as far as what we think love and trust is about, because there's this whole other aspect of our hormonal complex that creates bonds that is vasopressin.
mm,
And, it's said that people, like men, typically run more vasopressin than women. Women typically run more oxytocin, which is the like other bonding, the lovey-dovey,
mm,
warm, fuzzy feeling of safety with another person. Vasopressin only works as a bonding agent between two human bodies when there's a little bit of unsafety in the room, when there's a little bit of cortisol there's a little bit of danger, there's a little bit of problem solving that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's a whole other, like, I think about the conversation of belonging. I'm like, recently I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking this question of lack. I was like, who do the men in my life get to be when that vast person gets to have a place and a role
Mm-hmm.
where its role is not to structure me and make me safe, where I'm structured and made safe by the earth, but rather that there's an actual like thread of partnership that's available in moving through dangerous situations together and making it out alive, which causes us to trust ourselves more. It's a
Mm-hmm.
cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really important element, I feel like, in birth and in birthing relationships between parents, is that both of these are online, that there is a role and there's a place for these two hormonal components, these two different sides of love to come together
Mm-hmm.
to build a life, right? We not only need to feel safe and secure in our bodies, but we need to trust ourselves to lean in and pull up when we don't feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
are both crucial. They are both uh, and I personally feel, and this is something that I'm like, I need to work with like actual biologists and researchers on this, because I'm like, I'm just somebody in my bedroom writing things down, if we're all being honest. But I just honestly feel that part of the visionary crisis that a lot of people experience, where they feel like, I don't have capacity, I can't trust myself, I can't move forward, I can't pull up, I don't feel responsible, I feel too responsible. Like that collapse of the body happens because we don't know how to source the structure and the containment for that oxytocin to flow from the earth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we don't also have like a place for that vasopressin to churn and cycle our response systems to be healthy, right? We think about the sympathetic response is bad and the parasympathetic response is good, and it's just not true. We need to have a healthy relationship with both that is rooted in the earth, that says, like, I know how to pull up and feed myself and my family when it's time. I know how to be a partner. I know how to lean in. I know how to engage a healthy amount of heat so that things can be generated from this experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about my life, and some of the most like dangerous and difficult experiences by myself have deepened the bond with myself. And then when
Absolutely.
I've had those experiences with others, that's when I feel most connected with those others. And
Absolutely.
it makes sense evolutionarily. Like most of human history has been in the pattern of immediate return hunter-gathering lifestyle, in these small bands with our families and extended families, facing the beauty and brutalness of Earth,
Mhm.
and facing intense carnivores that want to eat us, and competing for food and taking life with our hands, and the violence again of the goddess, meeting that head
Mhm.
on every day. And that those dangerous experiences, of course, they would bond us deeper, and that there would be incredible, mysterious, and magical bioenergetics, and
Absolutely.
right. And then I think too of like, I've spent a lot of time in traditional sweat lodges, with folks up in Alberta, Canada, in the Native American tradition, up there. And just those experiences, spending a couple or a few hours in an intense environment, womb-like environment of heat and wetness, and that like I felt so bonded to those people, even if they were strangers, just from that one experience. And I noticed that if we would sweat together more than once, like a handful of times, or some of the people there there was a bit of a community around it, there was such a depth of bonding that went beyond words and ideas and stories
Absolutely.
that you just felt it. Like we didn't even have to talk
Absolutely.
about it. We wouldn't even have to talk after a sweat. It was just so simple. It was just like, oh yeah, it felt like there's just something in our bodies that are now intertwined, and it doesn't really matter who and what you are outside of that. We're just deeply bonded through going through that experience together. So it makes me think about how important and essential these difficult ritual experiences are in community and in relationship to each other and our environment and landscape. And of course, how lacking that is in modern life. Um, and that it feels more important than ever to seek out variations of that in our co-liberation work together.
Mm.
Not just turning toward the light and the beauty and the love, but how can we create difficult experiences together, whether that's
Absolutely.
actually physical, like that's probably important, but also by descending into depths of psyche, soul,
Yes.
heart, and spirit together and exploring.
Absolutely.
Like I think about, there's some people in my life right now. They won't listen to this, they won't hear it, and I don't think there'll be enough information for anybody to know. So I think it's safe to share it. But they're ending their very long relationship, and it has to do with them hiding from each other, keeping deep, deep, painful secrets from each other. And it's like, it makes me think about that. Like, if they would have met each other in honesty and the
Mhm.
painful discussions
Yes.
that would have been
Yes.
important when they arose, they
Yes.
would have bonded not only more deeply on a psycho-emotional level, but at that deep, visceral, bodily level. Like, that's the
Absolutely.
danger that you're meeting together just through baring your heart and soul and exploring
Absolutely.
conversations that are difficult.
Absolutely. Oh, yes. But our culture is set up to do everything at all costs to avoid any
Mm,
kind of discomfort, any
mm,
kind of like, and that's a part of where my grief comes in. Is like
mhm,
we are, I was sharing with my business partner earlier, is like I really hate it when the tones between people shift into hyper professionalism as like a buffer,
mm,
where 2 seconds before you were feeling open and comfortable, and then the next second when it comes to like asking for what you need or sharing a discomfort, I have no idea what you're even saying because it's so hidden in your professionalism. I have no idea how to meet you in your need because it's so hidden in your quote unquote clear communication. It's not clear,
mm,
right?
mm,
It's
mm.
actually hidden. And what does a culture of professionalism look like when you're able to just share plainly, oh, this is where I am. This is where I went in the conversation,
Yeah,
right? What would open? What would become available?
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
But
No need to know, just the question of it, and the willingness and the courage. This is something I'm reminding people, myself and people and clients of all the time. Do you know the root words of courage, like what that means?
no, tell me.
Yeah, okay. It basically means to be with heart, to be connected to your heart. Courage, it's like got these most recent French roots. To be with heart. And we think of the lion in Wizard of Oz, and he was
Mm,
looking for that courage to connect to his heart. So really, to be courageous, and you're speaking to this, like, we have these kind of surface level conversations that happen, and then as soon as the conversation goes somewhere where there's a little bit more depth, we get below that surface into the microbial, mycelial, depths of what it means to be alive in this immediate moment together.
yeah.
Whoa, that's scary, because that's where all the feeling lives. That's where
Mhm,
your heart is connected. And if you've grown up in this culture, you've been trained to turn away from your feelings, to
mhm,
avoid your heart's capacity to be
mhm.
touched by the depth of soul that's alive in the moment. So to be courageous is to remember your heart and to turn toward the depth and the nuance and the complexity of feeling, and to know that you
Wow.
don't have to figure it out. You don't need
Yes, I love
to
this.
know anything.
Yes.
You just need to turn toward it and open to it. That's courage.
Yeah.
And of course, vulnerability is wrapped up in that, because to be courageous and to bare your heart like that, it means that you're willing to be hurt. And that's the root of vulnerability, having a willingness to be hurt.
Oh,
So
yes.
it's
And this is
so
heart intelligence. This is heart intelligence. It's like,
right. That's right. I
uh,
call it wild heart wisdom. This is my
mhm.
inquiry. What does it mean to remember the wildness of heart, and to honor that incredibly mythic wisdom that lives therein?
Absolutely.
Do you have time for one more question?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, it's connected to what we were just chatting about in a bit of a different way, maybe. We'll see. But I've seen you ask in your inquiries, how deep am I willing to go into examining my relationship with work? In your own journey, what have been some of the most profound or surprising revelations that have emerged as you've explored your relationship with work? How have these revelations influenced your life path most recently? And how do they shape the way you guide others in their own explorations?
Yeah. Hmm. This is a big one. It's one I've been sitting with today and actually touching into my own grief about. Um, One of the big ways is like, what is my relationship? And I think about this question, I think I was asking it in a regenerative context. So like, I want to live a regenerative paradigm, and maybe even in some,
Mm,
right? Like, not just stop at the dogma of regeneration or regenerative culture, but like explore beyond it. But can I even meet and say hello to what a regenerative paradigm is inviting us into? Is the earth is inviting us into something very specific. And one of the things that Carol Sanford offers as a contemplation in her 7 principles is the concept of feedback. She says she actually wrote a book called No More Feedback.
mm,
And I love her for it because she's kind of that elder who's hanging out in the business space, challenging all of these founders
mm,
and inviting them into a new paradigm. And they keep hiring her. She's in her 80s. And she's like, she basically writes about how feedback culture is one of the most toxic business practices that we engage across all industries and cultures of business. And before you turn off the podcast episode and say that's hogwash, it just, whoever's listening, I've been sitting with this inquiry around like how much, what are the subtle adjustments and nuances to this teaching that are for me. And one of the big ones is how examining how much I have lived for other people's approval of my work rather than doing what my soul came here to do. How much of my current life of work is bound up in protecting this image of the good girl and the good friend and the good business partner, and is draining my energy, is an expression of some egoic ascent without descent, trying to skip the whole cycle of becoming straight
mm,
to, I love working with the 4 directions of this. I'm trying to skip straight from the east, where the seed begins, all the way into the north, instead of going through the south and the west, right?
mhm,
Those
mhm,
places of becoming, I'm trying to go all the way to the north,
mm,
skip around,
mm,
and
mm,
not engage this developmental arc. And that's an egoic process that leads me to discover I actually don't have the capacity I don't have what's required to do other people's path. I don't have the mechanisms in my system to standardize everybody's suggestions for what I should be doing with my energy and time and voice and essence. Because if I did, I would be like the perfect standard Harvard University Press professorial founder on earth. I'd be perfect. I would be a child of the paradigm and the whole regime. You know, I would be the model citizen if I took in everybody's inputs. And so part of how I'm sitting with this question is like, how do I practice discernment? You know, I even think about Brene Brown's work in Daring Greatly. She's like, you know, not everybody needs to be in the ring with you, offering you reflections on what you're doing. Right? If they're not in the ring with you, if they're not walking with you, if not, they're not in the dirt with you, in the blood with you, what are you doing taking in their inputs into
Also,
your awareness?
What ring are you in and why?
Questions. The questions, because we could be spending a lot of energy, you know, fighting these phantom demons in this other realm.
Yeah.
When we could have been living peacefully, you know, in our own gardens, you know, here to weather the storms that we're here to weather and not everybody else's. And this is a complex question. This is a complex inquiry. I really acknowledge that. But it's the honest one I've been sitting with of like, you know, even my ancestors, like, you know, how much of my creative effort has been spent enmeshed even with my own ancestors and trying to make them proud and fix the entire bloodline, you know, instead of just living in my dharmic path. You know, I've been calling it rewilding the ancestors. Sometimes the ancestral spirits just want to live vicariously through you. You got to have a little boundary and say, Grandma, I know you want to live vicariously through my body, but let's put you into the earth. Like, this is like, you know, there's so many like beautiful processes for this, like this inquiry, but it seeps into every layer of my work. It's like, what part of me is like, you know, trying to make my ancestor proud, and I'm contorting into this version of myself that's not actually my essence? What part of me is trying to be a good business partner, and I want to do that, you know, standard operating procedure in this very particular way, but I can't get myself to write 2 sentences inside of that SOP. It all sounds like Chat GPT when I do that. So how do I like release and let God, you know, and just allow myself to be who I am and honor my own process and build systems that can support that? Right? Like it's like at the most mundane level ever. Like even at the morning, where am I trying to fulfill, you know, this identity of like, I'm someone who has a morning practice. I'm someone who goes to therapy. And your morning practice drains all your life force out of you before you've even sat down to have your first cup of coffee and read the first email. Like you're doing ice baths, Ashtanga yoga. No, I'm just being real. Like these are the levels that too many inputs, and not enough discernment. And not like, you know, having that conscious team of elders and people who respect our essence, right? Like you only need a few people commenting on your life. Just a few. You don't need everybody. You don't need every podcast on the planet. You don't need, you know, Joe Rogan and what's his name? The other guy, Aubrey Marcus. You don't need all of them inputting on what you should be doing on your daily morning practice.
Yeah. What makes me think like what is your landscape? Like your literal like landscape, and also like the of course the beings and the people in your landscape.
Yes.
Like, because
who's in your
those are the ones that matter most.
Your
They're the ones
pantheon.
that are a part of your multi-layered, multi-storied community that's facilitating growth, that's directed by the actual flows and forces that are embedded in your now moment. When you tune into these podcasts with like Aubrey Marcus, for example, he's in a completely different landscape. No, totally. He's done great things, right?
Whatever.
But he's in a different landscape. And it's not that he can't be peripheral to yours. And in fact, it can probably be really helpful for a lot of people. But if you're only looking to the periphery, you're not going to be lifted up and filled up, nurtured and nourished and grounded and rooted by the garden of your own heart and the
Absolutely.
landscape of which your garden has been
Essential.
cultivated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Well, Dajé, I said that right, Dajé?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here.
Of
I think
course. Thank you for asking.
your heart and your mind and your thinking and your writing and what you're doing in the world, your essence is so important and so beautiful. And it
Thank
was
you.
a real honor to have this opportunity to sit down and chat with you and learn more about you. And I hope that we can do more of that in some capacity moving forward. And
Yes.
I'm really excited to share this with people. And I wonder if you want to direct people with your voice to your work. Of course, I'll include things in the description, but if you have anything you want to say in directing people toward things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can be found on the internet in most places as the Story Doula. So Instagram, Substack, sometimes I'm on Threads, whatever. If you want to have a conversation, I'm there. You can also find my work at www.thestorydoula.co. I'm also over at storywork.studio. This is my little sanctuary for creative, visionary, and spiritual development. And so it's there that we do creative rites of passage, leadership development, and even vision and business development through this lens. So very thankful to be here, Tay. Thank you for the invitation. And this is such a rich conversation.